New Mexico is rarely on anyone's 2024 Senate battlegrounds, but the GOP is hoping to change that by running Nella Domenici, the daughter of former popular Republican Senator Pete Domenici. Now, Pete Domenici was the last Republican senator elected in New Mexico. His last election was back in 2002, who won by a landslide. Very popular figure. And the Republican Party is hoping to replicate that success in the 2024 election by running his daughter. So we're going to talk about the implications of this race, why potentially Nella Domenici could be a strong candidate to go up against Martin Heinrich in New Mexico, and ultimately how this race is likely to end up. Obviously, I will preface this with the caveat of saying that it's very early on in the election cycle, but this is shaping up to be a pretty expensive race. We're going to get to all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So obviously the Republican Party is trying to expand the Senate map. And anywhere they can get the Democrats to spend money in places like New Mexico and Maryland are less dollars that are going to Ohio, Montana, and Pennsylvania. States that actually are battleground Senate contests. Now, if we take a look at, Domenici's resume, she works for Bridgewater Associates, which instantly reminds me of Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania. There's also other similarities there as well, mainly because Nella Domenici can actually self-fundraise, which is something that the Republican Party needs now that a lot of the state parties are essentially bankrupt, since most of the Republican dollars are going to, Trump-oriented super PACs as opposed to just the Republican Party in general. So a lot of Republican state parties have been struggling in the post-2020 era, and, New Mexico is probably not much different. I mean, New Mexico's Republicans haven't had a statewide victory since 2014 with the re-election of Governor Susana Martinez. So it's been about 10 years since the Republican Party has had success in New Mexico, and they're trying to change that this time around. Now, obviously, I think Nella Domenici is probably going to try to use the name of her late popular father to try and get elected here. I mean, he was known for working a lot with energy policy, budget, and of course, mental health and things like that. So he was a very popular senator. And if we go back to his last re-election bid in 2002, he ended up beating his Democratic opponent essentially 2-1. And that's pretty much a common theme with his last couple of elections. So, he's been in the Senate since 1972. He stepped down in 2008 and was replaced by Democrat Tom Udall. So New Mexico is an interesting state because it is very much a blue state. If we take a look at the ratings for this race, a lot of companies have this as safe Democrat. A lot of these election political publications have the Democrats winning this comfortably. And while I agree that Democrats are more than likely going to win this election at the end of the day by several points, I think a lot of people overestimate just how blue New Mexico is. I mean, when compared to other states in the Southwest, and we'll take a look back at 2020, for instance, New Mexico isn't a state undergoing large demographic change. New Mexico is very stagnant when it comes to population growth. It's really not a state that's growing very fast. If we take a look at Colorado, its neighbor to the north, this state has exploded in growth over the past couple of decades. And, it went from a pretty reliably Republican state, conservative, libertarian state, to very much a Democratic progressive state in just a couple of decades. And of course, the last time we had a presidential election, the Democrat carried the state by over 13 percentage points. But New Mexico actually voted to the right of Colorado, and its politics have been relatively stagnant. If we go back to 2008, for example, of course, you have Barack Obama winning the state by 15 points. You fast forward to 2010, Obama wins it by around 10, which Republicans had basically given up on New Mexico after 2008 because when it came to federal races, it was very clear that it was a blue state. But of course, in 2012, Obama only wins by around 10 points. Republicans see minor improvements in suburban and rural parts of the state. Then, of course, in 2016, Hillary Clinton only wins New Mexico by 8 points. Now, that's partly because Gary Johnson was on the ballot, and some of those third-party votes probably would have gone to Hillary. Trump only got 40% of the actual vote in New Mexico. But nonetheless, this isn't New York or California. Republicans can win statewide races here and have in the past, and there's really nothing saying that they can't win statewide elections in the future, even during a presidential election year. Now, of course, I have to throw in the caveat that you have to run basically a flawless, exceptional campaign, one that probably deviates a great deal from the campaign of the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. But it's not impossible for a Republican to win here. Now, it would require tons of money, which Nella Domenici has. She has deep fundraising connections, which is one of the reasons, again, why Republicans are so excited about her candidacy And, this is a race that could, in theory, get more competitive as time goes on. If we take a look at 2020, for instance, while Donald Trump lost the state of New Mexico by around 10 points to Joe Biden, almost 11 points, when it comes to the Senate election down ballot, Mark Ronchetti, who was the gubernatorial nominee in 2022, who ran against Ben Ray Lujan back in 2020, he only lost this election by around 6 points. So nearly an 11-point loss to a 6-point loss. You have down ballot Republicans doing decently better, even in places like Bernalillo County, home to Albuquerque. Only a 16-point margin for the Democrat. If we take a look at the presidential result, it was 61-36 for Joe Biden. So there's a little bit of split ticket voting going on in the state, and with somebody who has a popular last name, deep fundraising connections, and potentially with the right message, it's not impossible that a Republican could pull an upset here. Now, I don't think that's going to happen at the end of the day, but I do want to come back to this race probably as we get closer to November, because back in 2020, I was one of the few voices saying that the New Mexico Senate race would be somewhat close, because New Mexico has a history of having closer elections when you have non-incumbent Democrats. Of course, this is case in point. Now, Mark Ronchetti was a very good candidate, but you also didn't have an incumbent Democrat here. In 2024, there is an incumbent Democrat, which I think is one of the forces going against Nella Domenici in this election. Had this been an open Senate seat, I think she'd probably do a couple points better. Not win, but I think she would certainly get closer. If you go back to 2012, we saw something similar happen. You had Martin Heinrich. This was his first election. He only ended up winning by around 6 points against his Republican opponent. And, the Republican did decently better than Mitt Romney did. Mitt Romney only got about 42% of the vote in New Mexico. She got around 45.5%. So down ballot Republicans tend to do better than Republicans for president. Now, 2024, I think, is going to be really interesting because you're going to see a lot of focus turn towards, obviously, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, less focus on New Mexico. Democrats might confidently think that this seat is in the bag, and potentially you could see a closer than expected result. Now, Martin Heinrich is an incumbent. He is a Democrat, obviously, so he has a massive advantage. And at the end of the day, I think it's probably a likely Democratic race at this point. I'm going to move it out of the safe category. Now, some people disagree with that because they think that, well, he won his last election by, 25 points. But if you take a look at, of course, who he was running against, Gary Johnson swallowed up 15% of the more than likely Republican vote. Now, of course, some of the Gary Johnson voters could have ended up going to Heinrich anyway, but, no Republican in New Mexico really gets 30% of the vote. Typically Republicans get anywhere from 40 to 45%. And, somebody like Nella Domenici certainly could get around 45, 46% of the vote if she runs an exceptional campaign. It also depends how well Donald Trump does in the state of New Mexico, because if Donald Trump is doing a point or two better, ends up only losing the state by, say, 8 points, she could potentially bring this Senate race down to around 5 or 6. Now, that's still not enough to win, but that could potentially help down-ballot candidates. Now, Trump's performance in New Mexico in 2024, I think, is still up in the air. Obviously, he's not going to win the state, but if he brings the state down to, 6 points, let's say, it certainly opens up the possibility for a very competitive Senate race. Now, at the end of the day, I don't think this race is as competitive. I think it's more competitive than people are saying, especially since I think this Republican has the potential to be a very strong candidate. But, of course, as of right now, I'm still putting it in the likely Democratic column. I think Heinrich probably wins re-election anywhere from 8 to 10 points. But it's only April, and we still have many months to go before the election. So we're certainly going to come back to New Mexico in October, November, somewhere around there. But this is really a good play, I think, by Republicans. You want to run strong candidates wherever you are in the country, because anywhere that Democrats can spend resources in other places, that's less money that's going to battleground states that actually do have a potential of flipping. The Republicans in 2024 have a decent Senate recruitment list. Of course, you have Nella Domenici in New Mexico. You have Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, Tim Sheehy in Montana. So you really have strong Senate recruits on the Republican side. Now, you do have some duds. I think Kari Lake in Arizona, certainly a dud. Bernie Moreno in Ohio, probably a dud. Still has the possibility of winning, but I think it makes the seat a lot more competitive than it otherwise would be. I think any other Republican besides him would probably have a much easier time beating Sherrod Brown, although, again, he's a tough opponent to beat. He's got deep union connections. He's a household name in Ohio. But, Republicans are, for the most part, trying to play their cards right in the 2024 Senate races, because this really is their chance to take back the Senate And, potentially they're on track to lose the House. So at least if they have the Senate and potentially the presidency, they could get some things done in 2024. But as for a Republican trifecta in 2024, I think that's extremely unlikely at this point in time. But who knows? But New Mexico sort of acts as sort of a backup plan for the GOP if all else fails, albeit it's a very precarious one. But there is the possibility there when you have a strong enough candidate. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoy, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.